The latest AI models have very strong reasoning capabilities. What that means is they can think rigorously and at length about the task when given the right context. I find myself more and more using AI as a reasoning engine. Let's take a look. Here's an example where thinking for a long time can help get a better response. If you are car shopping and are considering trade-offs among multiple cars, you might upload spec sheets for the cars, insurance plans, car loan quotes, lots of documents, and then ask, what are the trade-offs for each car? Read everything and think hard before answering. The AI model may then think for quite a long time to read the documentation, maybe do some online search, then maybe think through what are the evaluation criteria that will be right for you, and then generate reports on the pros and cons of different cars. And just as doing research on what car to buy could involve gathering a lot of information and thinking at some length about the pros and cons, AI can help you with that. As AI models get better, their ability to carry out long-running tasks has grown rapidly. This is a study by an organization, Meter, which plots for tasks at different levels of difficulty as measured by how long it will take a human to do the task. That's the vertical axis. How well can AI do these tasks? So for example, a task like finding a fact on the web may take a human just several seconds. Summarizing a few pages of text may take a human an hour. Write a blog post, a couple hours. Audit legal documents. Explore a complex cybersecurity vulnerability may take a human many hours, and so on. And around 2024, 2025, models could start to do tasks that took seconds to many minutes or tens of minutes. And in 2025, models could start to have a decent success rate for doing tasks that took humans longer and longer and longer, to the point where now AI models can do tasks that can take humans many hours to do. Often the AI model doesn't need 10 hours to do a task that takes a human 10 hours to do, but also takes a bit longer than just a few seconds. And this is what reasoning models has enabled for the AI to think at great length in order to do these more complex tasks. If you remember the how many R's in strawberry example, that's a task that takes a human just a few seconds to do. And several years ago, AI models used to sometimes get this wrong. And it was also in that era, maybe 2023, 2024, that you may have heard advice like tell the AI model to think step by step. And back then, this was good advice, but this advice is largely obsolete now. And I no longer tell my AI model to think step by step. Instead, I'm more likely to just tell it to think hard, and it knows what that means, and that it should reason at length, not necessarily step by step, but in even more complex ways in order to accomplish the task successfully. And so rather than think about AI as counting R's and strawberries or having to be told to think step by step, today you can ask AI models much more complex questions like what are the trade-offs for each car, or look at all this context and help create a script for a custom podcast. So for these more complex tasks, I recommend trying to use one of the more modern models if you're able to access one. And there may well be models even more modern than the ones listed on the slide that could be available to you now. So this is how AI reasoning or how AI thinking at length works. If you ask it to plan the fastest way to visit 5 landmarks in Rome in one day, then it might want to gather quite a lot of information to check map distances via web search, estimate walking times, search opening hours, reorder the stops, and so on, and then generate your optimized itinerary. The reasoning process may require the AI to think at length and repeatedly gather additional information and then to think some more until it's satisfied with the answer. Conceptually, you can think of reasoning as a process like this. Given your prompt and other input context, it will reason or think for a while using that context. And then depending on where it gets to, maybe it'll decide it's done and then just give you the final answer. Alternatively, after thinking for a while, it may decide that it needs to use a tool to gather more information, maybe via web search or maybe by reading more files from your computer if it's a desktop app, and then use that additional context to reason longer until it either again decides to use a tool to gather more information or decides it's done. And so it can go through a few rounds of gathering more information and reasoning longer before it decides the answer is good enough to present to you. If you are working on a complex task and you want the model to think at length, then one way to do so is to just tell the model to think. A few of the interfaces among the popular AI model providers will have a thinking option, and if you select that option, that's a cue to the model that you want it to think longer. Alternatively, in your prompt, you can also just tell it to think really hard about this and usually obey your instructions. Or some people will use the phrase ultra think, and that's another keyword that the models understand as a cue to, think really hard about it. And if you do so, an AI model will sometimes think for many tens of seconds or even minutes, or maybe sometimes even over 10 minutes in order to give you a good answer. Especially with reasoning or with thinking models, I also encourage you to try giving the model hard tasks to see what it can do for you. So if you are building a startup, maybe give it lots of context on what you're doing, and maybe tell it to design a top-line plan for a 4-person startup with limited cash. I encourage you to give the AI model real job tasks, real problems that you want to think through or that you want to solve. And as part of setting up for success, try to give it all the context that a human expert would need in order to complete the task, to make sure that the AI model has the sufficient information that really anyone would need to do the task successfully. To wrap up, if you want to use AI to reason at length about complex problems, I encourage you to use the best models available. The best models are often better than models that are maybe 6 to 12 months older. Remember to give it as much context as is needed to carry out the task. It's okay to try giving it hard tasks to see what it can do, so don't just give it trivial tasks. And lastly, either select thinking mode or just tell it in the prompt to think hard. We've spoken about when it's helpful to use the cutting-edge models, but it turns out even the most up-to-date models have some common issues. One being the tendency to tell you whatever it thinks you want to hear. This is called sycophancy. Let's go on to the next video to see how to manage this behavior of AI models.